our teachers always say it's not the ayahuasca actually that does the healing, it's the ayahuasca in relationship with the plant diets. The ayahuasca is almost like the medium from which the plant diets come in, and they affect their healing, and so it's seen as an incredibly important ally and connector, and like it opens the worlds, that what's known in that tradition as the mariacion. The mariacion is like the trance, the world of the trance, the world of the spirits. And then it's the curandero who's trained and has got skills, who then kind of, it's almost like an orchestra of relationships that then do this deep healing work.
Hello, and welcome to Sacred Herbalism, the full moon segment of the Elder Tree podcast, where we explore how plants and fungi can support us to enter into a sacred relationship with life and the living world. I'm your host, Stephanie Hazel, herbalist, anthropologist, and a deep lover of this wild world. Let's walk into the moonlit forest together, into a world of magic, mysticism, psychedelic teachers, and, of course, the plants themselves. Are you ready? Hello and Happy New Year, everyone. I'm wishing you a year full of prosperity, full of plants, full of connection. And this episode, I'm actually re-releasing one of my early episodes from the first 6 months. And I'm doing this because it continues to mark me and travel in my psyche. This conversation with Skye, who I've interviewed twice, really helped me understand the importance of animism as the contextual landscape for our practice with psychedelic plants and with medicinal plants in general. Now, what I mean by the context is the subconscious myths, stories, and beliefs we hold that allow us to make sense of the work that we do with plants, that allow us to make sense of the world around us, our experience of the world, but specifically I'm speaking about our experience of plant medicine. In our culture, we are generally have been educated either explicitly or subtly to experience humans as having agency and awareness, and maybe animals to some extent, but then the plant world is kind of objectified. So it means that we think of the medicine that we are working with, whether it's the psychedelic medicine, the spiritual medicine, or whether it's the medicine of, the antibacterial quality of tea tree. We think of that medicine as living inside the plant, that it is a physical property of the plant, right? We do, right? That's how we think of it. And yet, when we do that, when we think of it in that way and we engage with the plant as containing medicine that we want to extract and use as a tool and as a commodity, something is lost. Especially when it comes to psychedelic plants, something is lost. And I see this in the evolving landscape of psychedelic psychotherapy in the world at the moment. There is a understanding of magic mushrooms having psilocybin that is medicinal. If you just extract the psilocybin and apply it in a clinical kind of cold setting, it will do its fixing of the broken brain, and there we go. And again, something is lost. What's lost? Well, what's lost is the understanding of medicine as a relational concept, the understanding that medicine arises, it's an emergent property. It arises from the relationship between the person, the plant, and the context. So the medicine of Damiana will be different for you if you are a female who is ovulating, who hasn't had children, on a full moon at a party, will be a different medicine for you than if you are a man in your 60s or 70s who's losing his mojo and feels really flat and depressed about life. The medicine will be different because it's about you and the plant and the context in which you are existing, the climate, the weather, the time of life, etc. And the same is true with psychedelic plants. Psychedelic plants offer us an experiential medicine, right? They give us a journey, and that journey opens doors and opens eyes and changes the way we feel about things. But that journey happens inside a context. Are you in the jungle? Are you just sitting in a room with a playlist playing and a therapist watching you? Are you standing under the full moon, dancing and howling at the moon? all of these things change the way that we experience the medicine. That's part of the context, but I think that if we're going to replace this story of materialism and replace the story that locates the medicine in the physical matter of the plant that can be extracted, brewed, made, sold, commodified, then we need a new context. This conversation with Skye that you're about to hear has been really pivotal in my last 3 years of allowing me to see the context that I've been grasping for as animism. So animism is the original form of human spirituality. If you look at all humans that ever existed, 90% of them have been animist. To not be an animist is a strange blip in human cultural history, right? And animism is basically the understanding and the lived experience that all beings are alive, that have awareness and agency, from the chamomile bush in your garden to the storm clouds, to the kangaroo, to the full moon, to the other beings and other people. Animism allows us to experience the world as an ensouled network of relationships. Do you get what I'm saying? I know that if you've ever had psychedelic plants, you've probably felt that ensouled network of relationships. You've looked at the fire and it's felt alive. You've walked through the forest and you've felt the trees breathing. You've felt like you are participating inside this incredible orchestra of aliveness. And animism puts language around that so we can talk about it. The more that I work with this idea, the more that I understand that I deeply believe that without this mythopoetic landscape, that we can understand life as alive, that we can start having actual relationships with the plants that we work with the environment around us, with the rocks outside my window. The more that we can do this, the more grounded we feel and the more potent we are in our work with medicinal plants. For me, any psychedelic practice that doesn't actually work with the psychedelic plants to support a return to a lived experience of animism is missing the point. And I know that the more I work with plants like this in my clinic, I don't do this with everyone, but I choose the people to say, here is rhodiola, here is passion flower. Let me tell you about this being. And this plant can be your friend, and you can work with them intentionally, and you can give thanks, right? All those things point to an understanding of those plants as being alive. You can give thanks. When I work with plants in that way, the medicinal effect is stronger, the transformation is stronger. And possibly I needed to see that to believe it, but I've seen it again and again and again. So I offer you this conversation, a re-release of an important conversation in my life and my journey as an emerging animist herbalist, in the hope that it might support you to open this doorway more fully in your own practice with plants, especially with psychedelic plants. And honestly, Skye is an amazing storyteller, and hearing her talk about her journey to the Amazon at 16 years old and her studying of curanderismo, which is an absolutely animist relational way of engaging with plants, where ayahuasca is kind of kindergarten, her teachers say. Her stories are engaging and captivating. So if you want to experience plants as sacred in this way, Skye does run a beautiful course that you can find in the show notes. And the work that I do in my Plant Allies work, in my Wild Edge of Herbalism, my courses also have a very strong focus on developing the capacity to sense the aliveness and the beingness of plants we work with. So if you feel inspired, then feel free to reach out and we'll see what doors can be opened together for you. In the meantime, have a really beautiful year, and I really pray that this year brings you significantly closer to the plants in whatever way that looks for you, and that you feel deep satisfaction and an easeful unfolding in your plant path. I know that you had an incredible experience of being 16 and going to live in the Amazon studying plant medicine. which is an incredible journey that I'd love to hear more about. Would you mind sharing some?
Yeah, so actually I went to the Peruvian Amazon for the first time at 16 just for a retreat, and then I returned home after that. And then I returned at 23, and I was there from 23 to 28. So yeah, but my first experience of working with ayahuasca in a retreat setting was at 16 years old, and yeah, it was. I mean, it completely changed my entire trajectory in life, and I feel like it came at the perfect moment because I was experiencing quite quite deep, severe death anxiety. Actually, you know, the atmosphere in South Africa. There's a lot of fear, and I had seen my grandmother passing away from cancer just a few years before, and yeah, I grew up in a kind of rationalist materialist household in the sense that I wasn't given any kind of cosmology for meeting impermanence and the reality of death, and awakening to that was terrifying for me as a child, and I ended up becoming like I could not sleep well at night without thinking about it. It was just really took over my days and nights, and started experiencing panic attacks, all kinds of things, essentially. And my grandmother, the same one who passed of cancer, she left me an inheritance, a small inheritance. And I used that to fly to Peru at 16 and participate in an ayahuasca retreat. And yeah, my parents were very cool. They let me go. Um,
Clearly.
and yeah, it was absolutely phenomenally life changing experience. And I knew that I would go back, and I went back some years later. Yeah.
It's quite interesting that you were having that experience so young, and I think that maybe, as you've said, being in South Africa, which is a culture and a time in history as well, when you were younger, there was a lot of violence, and so you were probably exposed to that a lot more than
Yeah.
most of us in Australia would have been. Um,
Absolutely. Way
yeah,
more.
and you're right. You know, I think that's the big thing why the topic of the sacred is so enlivening and feels important to me is that it's quite unusual in the history of humanity for us to come of age in a culture that does not actually give us mythological or spiritual guideposts to help us navigate all these other experiences that we are having, deny them or accept them or not. They're happening
Yeah.
under the surface in our dreams, in our heart, and we can deny them for a certain point of time. And then people get to a point, usually much later than 16, like, I'm going to
Yeah.
die. What does it all mean? And there's not much guidance. And even for you, growing up in a household of a herbalist and a plant witch, essentially, like you had all
Mm.
these interesting influences around you, that still wasn't there. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's why I feel this topic is so potent. And for me, I think my experience of that, my parents were, hippies, and we traveled for many years. We lived on a boat and lived in Africa. We lived in Canary Islands, and I had a Buddhist birthing ceremony. My dad's
Wow.
quite a strong practicing Buddhist, but still, I remember going to a Catholic school in far north Queensland when I was a child, and I actually am really grateful for the religious education that I had in high school, because even though I don't identify as Christian, my parents were like, yeah, there's beauty in it, take what you like. So it was a very permissive way to engage
Right.
with the church. And I loved singing in the choir, and I loved singing to God as a little girl, But I remember being about 8, coming home to my dad and being like, I had a teacher who was particularly religious, and I was saying, they're telling us that if we don't believe this and that, we'll go to hell, and which is an awful thing to do to a child.
It's
But
terrible.
and I was like, should I believe that? Like, what should I believe? I remember my father turning around and saying, well, they believe that, I believe this, and he told me a whole story about Buddhism. But that's not what you believe. Part of your journey of being alive as an adult and a human is to find what you believe to be true for you. And that does sound really beautiful, but I remember being furious at him, because at
Mm.
that age, that was so much responsibility to put on a little child, and I
Mm.
really needed some guideposts.
Yeah.
So there is some beautiful wisdom in what he was trying to offer me,
Yeah.
and it's much better than like, believe in Jesus or you're going to hell kind of mentality, or believe in XYZ and you're having this terrible, or you'll have this terrible outcome. It's not just Christianity that does that. But yeah, I really felt at that point like, no, you're my father. You're meant to be giving me more guidance than that in this
Mm.
world. Yeah, and then where are we finding that? And it sounds like for you, you found some of that mythopoetic, sacred mapping and framework in the Amazon. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, I would say. Well, first of all, yeah, I hear how challenging it would have been to be offered this open the world essentially as so young without a solid pointer, and also at the same time how incredible that you grew up with such, I guess, comparatively conscious or aware parents compared to so many of us. So yeah. I think in my family, like, yeah, my mum was a herbalist, as you know, but at the same time it was still very much embedded in the stories of modernity, in objectification and consumer, like there was very much, this is a herb that's outside of me and it's got these properties and this is what it's useful for, like it was still very approached in that way. And my father is a hardcore atheist, and when he was asked the question, what happens, he was like, well, you just get eaten by worms and this whole thing is a bizarre um, mistake, or whatever else. Like I wasn't really given much at all, which is terrifying. Yeah, terrifying, because I think at that age I was, simultaneously I'm in this country where it's, South Africa is one of the great loves of my life as a land. I absolutely love it, and it's a scary place to grow up. There is a lot of violence and um, discord, and yeah, like it was at that age where I was really, awakening to that in a big way, and so confused by that, and being a child, colonial child, and at the same time, like witnessing my grandmother passing through 4 years of cancer and losing the battle, through pharmaceutical Western medicine. And then, yeah, I guess another thing that actually set off was my cat, who was one of the dearest, also great loves of my life to this day, passing away from a heart attack in my arms at 14 years old. And having those three experiences very close together, um, and just not having any kind of guidance or framework for holding that, it's a deeply scary place. And I feel like actually so much of our culture and the things that we spend our time getting busy focusing on can be a way to like not feel that, to kind of like paste over that truth. Yeah, so anyway, I couldn't do it
Avoid,
for whatever reason. And
avoidance of death.
yeah, totally,
Yeah,
totally. Denial of death, that great denial of death. I
at
feel
great
that,
cost to ourselves and the earth
ah,
around us. It's
abs
interesting. It's
so
interesting
much.
for me that you've that was your impetus to go to meet ayahuasca, because bringing my father back into it, interestingly, he asked me at one point, maybe 5 years ago, well, what do you get from your experience with ayahuasca? He was really curious. And, being a Buddhist, he's very interested in soul and spirit. And I sat there and really thought about it. I wanted to give him a real answer. And I came to the place of being like, well, I think the one thing ayahuasca's taught me is that she's taught me how to die.
Hmm. Yeah, I would
And I don't
agree
know that,
with that.
I wouldn't say that to anyone, right? But my dad, being who he is, and I said that, and he was like, "Oh, well, that is very worthy." So that's
Yeah,
very important,
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
Buddhism is very focused on that moment. Well, his strand of Buddhism is very focused on that moment of death and how important that is, and
yeah,
knowing how to die being really
yeah,
important.
yeah, yeah. And I identify largely as a Buddhist myself, and we know, um, personally, when I was living in Peru, we had whole Buddhist sanghas come on retreat with us, and actually had a Tibetan Buddhist Lama come and train to offer ayahuasca to his sangha.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of the many stories we have from that time.
yeah.
Um,
And do you relate to that at all around learning how to die?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like that has been a massive transmission from the medicines to me. Surrender and death, again
Mm.
and again and again and again. Yeah,
Well, they're so related, right? Like death is the ultimate surrender. So when
yeah,
we're sitting in an experience that's really potent and terrifying, as ayahuasca really can be, and
yeah,
kind of should be, I think, then having that moment where you're feeling like, I need to try and control this, and surrender is letting go of control.
totally. Well, that was my very first ceremony at 16. Plunged me straight into my own death, and I spent, yeah, many hours dying again and again and again and again until it kind of spat me out into something that was, I guess I would now call my larger sense of self, or the place of no self, more specifically, actually. The ego death that births you into, again, that ineffable experience of being beyond a self. And that was my first ceremony at 16. It was, yeah, I mean, it's such a long
Congratulations.
story. Yeah, thank you. But I just knew that that was going to be part of my work. But the plants were very explicit, actually, on my third ceremony. I was told to go and study Chinese medicine. And I didn't know anything about Chinese medicine at the time. I didn't know anyone else who had studied Chinese medicine, but I found myself in the ceremony just, you can't see what I'm doing, but I was intuitively doing acupressure on myself and like working along what I now know to be the meridians, but I didn't know that that's what I was doing at the time. And yeah, I was really, I guess you could say, almost obsessed with finding, because in South Africa there was no place to study Chinese medicine. So I had made plans to like go and move to China or Cambodia and study it there. And just as I was about to leave, this is now a few years later after this experience in the jungle, I ended up entering into a traditional Chinese medicine apprenticeship with a doctor of Chinese medicine in South Africa, but it wasn't a school. He was literally a doctor of Chinese medicine from Mauritius, of Chinese lineage, from a very long lineage of practitioners. And he was just accepting a handful of apprentices, and I managed to worm my way in by some great synchronicity into this apprenticeship. And I'm so grateful that I had that. I had 3 years of intensive study with him, and it wasn't my path to do that full time. But I feel like it gave me a really good grounding into the language of energetics and some of the embodiment practice of Tai Chi and Qigong, and like, just yin yang and 5 element philosophy and all of that, to carry that into the jungle, into my 5 year apprenticeship, was really powerful. I feel like it helped me connect deeper with the plants in that tradition there. Yeah.
I could go into a whole thread of conversation with you around that interplay. I'd be fascinated, but I actually really want to hear more about what the shape of your 5 year apprenticeship in the jungle was like tell us more about that, please.
Yeah. So I ended up returning to the jungle after my 3 years of Chinese medicine. Um, Actually, with a year of wilderness guiding in between. I had a lot of a very eclectic early years. Yeah. So then I went to Peru, and my first year was a bit fumbling. Like, I didn't really know. I knew I wanted to study. I didn't know who I wanted to study with yet. I didn't have a plan. I just kind of arrived. I didn't have Spanish yet, so I knew I needed to get Spanish. Get Spanish. I'm still getting Spanish. I'm not that great at it, but it's functional. um, and so, yeah, I spent the first year just volunteering at different centers and finding my way to different teachers, and I guess being exposed to actually quite a wide array of different traditions. Like, there's the mestizo traditions, and then I guess the Shipibo, who I did end up studying with, are also really well known. But there's a lot of other approaches to ayahuasca, and they're really quite different. Um, and so I still chuckle when people talk about, I sat in ceremony with ayahuasca, because I feel like ceremony and ayahuasca can mean and can be such different things for so many different people. Yeah. Anyway, so I was really fortunate. I got to study with a mestizo and do a dieta with him for a few months. Volunteered at another center with a Witoto curandero for a few months, and I got to experience dieta and ceremony with quite a few different people and different approaches. And toward the end of that first year, I found my teacher. And this is actually a family of teachers, because his whole family practice, including his wife, and I ended up in apprenticeship in the Mahua Lopez lineage of within the Shipibo tradition. And I was simultaneously working as a facilitator at the Ayahuasca Foundation, and that's kind of how I funded my apprenticeship. So I was able to kind of sit in ceremonies because my job was to be a facilitator on retreats with my teachers, as well as a translator and also as a student. So while we were facilitating and taking care of all the mechanics of retreat, which is a lot, we were simultaneously being instructed on how to gather plants and prepare medicines. We sat in on all the consultations, and we were also very rigorously trained in ceremonial facilitation. So right from the get-go, we were, you know, being trained in singing icaros and doing dietas. And so, yeah, I would have these kind of concentrated experiences of sitting in retreat with my teachers and watching them, um, treat people of all kinds, with all kinds of reasons for being there. When I first got there, ayahuasca wasn't so known or popular, like it wasn't a household name yet. So a lot of the people that were finding their way to us were folks who were in deep need or were like deep seekers, you know. And I feel like it changed later on as it became a bit more popular. There was a lot more younger folk coming for the sake of exploration, which is, you know, that's valid as well. But the scene changed in my time there. Yeah, and we got to experience and witness our teachers treating all kinds of things. You
And
know,
just to be clear here, so the ayahuasca experience was part of that treatment process, but it wasn't the
yeah,
entirety of it. And there were a lot of other types of healing plants and healing practices that were being used. Would you mind speaking about that a bit?
yeah. Actually, thanks for naming that. So I would, yeah, I think what happens is that often folks think of it as ayahuasca, and even I'm using that language because that's just how it's spoken about now. But yeah, the retreats were curanderismo retreats, and we were studying curanderismo, which is an entire tradition of medicine of which ayahuasca is a part. Um, Now, obviously, a lot of the folks that were coming down on retreat were seeking out ayahuasca explicitly, but you know, we got to witness our teachers treating a lot of locals where ayahuasca is just not even a part of the treatment at all, you know. And you know, a lot of the locals actually thought we were all mad for wanting to drink as much as we did, and you know, actively seeking it out because it's not actually always a part of, well, often actually it's not a part of the treatment, only if it's seen to be necessary. Sitting in on ceremony is very common, um,
So
because
local people are sitting in on ayahuasca ceremonies without actually participating in or taking in ayahuasca into their own bodies.
yes, yeah. So in that
And what is the
tradition,
appeal of that for people?
yeah, so in the curanderismo tradition that we studied in, we work with the medicine, or we drink the ayahuasca as a curandero because it kind of enhances the sight. So it allows us to see into our patients and to diagnose what's going on. And it also opens the channels of connection with our plant allies, which we have built through, like, these are deep relationships that we've created through the process of dieta, which is like the keystone of that whole tradition. And I would say, you know, the part that I didn't get to before was, you know, between each retreat, we were going into dieta and like building like deep connection with different plants. And so the point of drinking the medicine is to connect with your plant allies and then to allow them to move through your songs, which are known as icaros, into the patients and do work. So essentially, your voice is like a channel or a pathway that your plant based relationships move along, and they do really deep intricate work, which sometimes you are like consciously aware of everything that's happening and sometimes you're actually not. You're just kind of, yeah, literally the channel for that work to take place.
That's so potent. There's a few things there that I want to unpack with you. I think one of them is the way that has changed as it's come into Western culture.
Mm,
The kind of some of these aspects of the curandero tradition of healing have come into the Western culture in a really strong way. Primarily, the use of ayahuasca as a kind of peak experience slash spiritual healing journey,
yeah.
right? And in some ways, I wonder whether that's so. so relevant for us because we actually do have a kind of spiritual illness that requires some deep remembering of sacred relationship.
There's
But
a
I do
lot I
think it's
can
really
say to
interesting.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's circle back to that.
Yeah.
Um, there's It's still interesting to me that the way that ayahuasca is being used primarily there in the curandero tradition with local people, it's that the healer is taking ayahuasca
Hmm.
because they are using that to strengthen the relationships with the plants and the medicines and the environment, the land, which makes them a better healer because it's the healing happens through those relationships. And
Yeah.
there's a shift there as we've brought ayahuasca into the Western context. We're very materialist, even
Hmm.
with ayahuasca, which is a very intense psychedelic kind of spiritual experience for many people. We're still very focused on no, the healing happens with the molecules. When the molecule
Hmm.
goes into my body, that's when I'm healed. It's a
Hmm.
really interesting switch from mm, relationship to material.
It's completely, it's like it's a world changing shift, really. And I feel like that was really like the deep part of what I received over there was this incredible transmission of lived transmission, embodied transmission of a worldview beyond, the rationalist, materialist, objectification worldview, and living animism, practicing animism. Um, yeah, but to go back to your point, like the ayahuasca in our tradition specifically, our teachers always say it's not the ayahuasca actually that does the healing; it's the ayahuasca in relationship with the plant diets. The ayahuasca is almost like the medium from which the plant diets come in and they affect their healing, and so it's seen as an incredibly important ally and connector, and like it opens the worlds that what's known in that tradition as the mariacion. The mariacion is like the trance, the world of the trance, the world of the spirits, and then it's the curandero who's trained and has got skills who then kind of, yeah, it's almost like an orchestra of relationships that then do this deep healing work. And yeah, it's very uncommon for like common local people who are not in apprenticeship to drink the medicine themselves. And a lot of them are
Yeah.
actually scared of it. They're very scared of it. Why are you doing that?
And so
Like,
they should be. It's terrifying.
yeah,
I've definitely spoken to people who are thinking about working with ayahuasca and having that experience. Like, oh, but I'm scared. I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
of course.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it's the same with dieta. Like dieta was considered a very like curanderismo, like apprenticeship specific activity
Mhm.
a lot of the time. There's such a thing as a healing dieta, which is a a set of prescriptions, dietary prescriptions, where you would be eating in a certain way and restricting certain behaviors, like for example not having sex, or in some cases like not going into direct sunlight, or whatever the restrictions might be, in combination with ingesting the healing plants that have been seen to be necessary through, usually through a ceremony or as some kind of diagnostic process. And yeah, that kind of dieta is very, very common for patients, but the dieta of building relationship with the plants for healing work is not really done outside of apprenticeship. Yeah,
So let's go into this concept of dieta because I think it's something that is really interesting and I think important for us to understand and not
definitely.
very well understood.
Yes, yeah,
So
highly
dieta,
misunderstood, I would
yeah,
say.
so dieta in Spanish, the word literally means diet. So when you're talking about a healing dieta, there, I think the closest thing that we would have would be a detox. Maybe you've
Yes.
seen a herbalist or a naturopath or a Chinese medicine doctor, and they've said, okay, you're working with this issue, then here's your prescribed diet. There are detox you're going to
Hmm.
be on, your cleanse, you're going to have juices and no coffee and alcohol, and then here's the herbs you're taking. So
Yeah.
like it's a healing program or a detox is quite similar. But then this other
Yes.
kind of dieta that you're talking about, this curanderismo apprenticeship dieta, is something that we don't really have in the Western tradition. And my understanding of it, I'd love you to flesh that out. I'll just share my understanding and
Sure.
then
Yeah.
please add, embellish. My understanding is that it's a process of going into a kind of retreat, sometimes also often on your own, and
Hmm.
having a very restricted fast like diet and working with a specific plant, and it could be for weeks or months, and that you're
Or
meeting
years.
this, or years. Wow.
Yeah.
So you're working with a specific plant that might be a particular medicinal plant from the jungle, and you are drinking it as tea and bathing in it and dreaming about it, and potentially using ayahuasca as a gateway opener to
Hmm.
enable you to communicate with that plant
Yeah.
more, and that it's a kind of contract you're making with that plant to say, yes, I
Mm.
want to carry the medicine that you have, please
Yes.
teach me and I will follow the instructions.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent overview. Yeah, I think a lot of folks are trying to, because they often get confused, the two kinds of dieta. So yeah, we've started calling the one a healing protocol or healing dieta or healing diet, and then the other one would be is now being commonly called a master plant dieta. Um, and everything you just said, yeah, spot on. There are different ways of approaching it, but the way that we do, my partner and I, and the way that we were trained to do it is generally in isolation and silence for the majority of the time. um, Total fasting, like anywhere from just pure water fasting, other than the intake of the medicine, the plant, that the body of the plant that you're working with. And then when you do start eating again extremely bland foods, the idea being that anything with strong flavor or strong energy will like interrupt the flow of the connection with your plant in question. So chili or garlic or yeah, any strong food really, because they each everything that you ingest has its own, I guess, um, animacy to it. And so we're trying to like really focus in and hone in and feel the impact of this relationship on the body, on the spirit, on the mind, on all different levels. And yeah, there's all these kind of ritual protocols that you can engage to help foster that connection, and you're really appealing to the plant in question to reach toward you and enter into a teaching relationship, or like a student teacher relationship with the plant in question. And they don't always, sometimes they don't, or not interested in connecting with you for whatever reason. It's not the right time, or that's not your medicine to be working with. And other times it's really, really clear that this is, some folks go short and deep as opposed to long and wide, in the sense that they'll diet just one tree over an entire lifetime. And we have one of our teachers who has like a very strong relationship with a particular tree, and while he has dieted with other plants, like he has returned to that one primarily again and again and again and again. And it's, for him, he says pretty much the whole world of medicine is contained within the relationship with just that one tree. Whereas other traditions or other folks would believe that the more diets you have, the more medicine you have. So yeah, it's just
That's
dependent.
definitely more aligned with the way we would think about it in the West, right? That there's
Yeah.
definitely the way I learned and studied herbal medicine through formal training in Australia. There's that unspoken assumption of like, the more herbs you know, the more medicine that you have. And for me, it's been a journey of kind of intentionally forgetting about half of the materia medica I studied and just going deeper and deeper with a smaller collection of plants, because
Totally.
that's when I feel that I actually can use them to better effect. And so much of what you're saying there about that process of like deep, reverent, direct transmission and study and relationship building is, feel, I want to breathe that in.
Mhm.
To invite
Mhm.
everyone listening is to breathe that in, what that kind of relationship with plants as a herbalist and a healer might feel like, because I don't actually know that. I'm like starting to touch the edges of that in my personal exploration. I've
Mhm.
never had a dieta experience like you're speaking about.
Yeah, it's really profound. It's a world changing, paradigm shifting experience to encounter a medicine from that. Like, I think so many of us, when we think of herbalism again, it's often like herbalism in our culture is often interchangeable in some ways with pharmacy. It's like, use this herb for this thing and that for that thing. And it's like someone who's skilled in herbalism is someone who's like memorized the materia medica and can, you know
Yeah,
whatever.
phytopharmacy, phyto being plant, the Latin name for plant.
Yeah.
Phytopharmacy is where is what we're taught, and it's something that I kind of resist, because anyone can, you could ask ChatGTP, what herbs do I use for bladder infection?
Totally.
There's no seeing in that. It's just
No.
a regurgitation of association, word association.
Yeah, yeah.
you
Whereas
know.
this is so the opposite. It's like deeply, deeply relational. It,
Mm,
like the medicine is obviously the plant itself has medicine, and if if any one random person were to prepare whatever mint, for example, there would be an effect. We know that there's a physiological response to
mm,
the chemical constituents of mint. But then in this tradition, it's that our teachers are like the deeper medicine is in the relationship,
mm,
and it's through this depth of relationship and entering into this kind of, yeah, I mean, some folks use the word contract. It's like this experience of, all right, yep, you and I, we're going to be together for a lifetime now. Because through the process of dieta, you're actually inviting, this is the way that my teachers describe it, you're inviting the plant to kind of energetically take root in your body. And in the process of dieta, you're creating the conditions where that you you can imagine. Okay, I'll just use mint again as an example. If I'm planting the seed, the energetic seed of mint in the soil of my body, and then through my practice of making space, I'm creating like the right conditions for that seed to start to grow. And it's
mm,
through my attention, it's through the ritual, it's through the awareness and the focus and the devotion. Actually, it's a very devotional process. You start to like energetically water and give sunlight to that seed within you, and it starts to grow. And
mm,
maybe in that first dieta it just sprouts, and then you need to do it again, and then it becomes a bit more of an established plant. And you can diet one plant over a lifetime and discover, like, it's there's no end to
mm,
where you can go with that relationship, just like a human or anyone else. Like, it's bottomless. But there are certain plants that are, I guess, more known for their worlds within worlds. And this particular tree I was referring to, which has become a bit more known now, it's called Noyerau, which it's a bioluminescent tree. Like, our teachers would speak to how Noyerau contains within it whole universes. So if you go and diet with Noyerau, you will eventually, dependent on the person, because also it's so personal, like,
mm,
each diet relationship is so personal, you might encounter, you know things that no other person who's dieted with Noyerau has encountered. And your kind of
mm.
flavor of bringing that medicine forward is so unique to the relationship that you have
Well,
as
that's
well.
what a relationship is about, right?
Yeah,
Like that's where that different perspective around kind of objective chemical constituents and relational thinking, because
yeah,
in a relationship, it's the emergent quality between two beings. So who you are as an individual meeting this plant or a person or anyone else, there's a
yeah,
particular energy that comes from that meeting that is
yeah,
not existing inside any other meeting. And I think the same happens, right, with patients, with clients that come to herbalists, and they're you're giving them a herb, and I think we can make the mistake of thinking that, mint always does this, that, and the other, or rosemary is always this, and then that's making the mistake of thinking about them like pharmaceuticals. But a
again,
pharmaceutical is
exactly,
one chemical, and a plant
absolutely.
is hundreds of chemicals that vary depending on where they were grown, when you picked them, what that particular plant's personality is in that moment. And so then it's like when you give someone a medicine, the relationship between that person and the medicine, even just biochemically, let alone psychospiritually,
Hmm.
changes the activity of that plant. I think
Absolutely.
that same relational materialist shift that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's an emergent experience between the plant and the
Yeah.
person. Yeah,
Medicine
and
is an
it's
emergent experience between a plant and a person. That's a really powerful. I'm going to say that again. Herbal medicine is an emergent experience of mutual healing and
hmm
and meeting between a plant and a person.
yeah, 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 yeah. It's so powerful. It's so powerful, and I feel like it was just this um yeah, this gift that I never experienced. I never expected to receive, really. I didn't know that that was what I was going to receive, really. And
Mm.
that's the piece that I feel unfortunately is being cut out and lost a lot as this tradition is being kind of decontext as the medicines are being decontextualized and brought to the West. I have such grief
Hmm.
because folks do not know what's being left behind. Yeah, I feel tears actually. Yeah, they don't know. Like that is the medicine that we need as Westerners. Is the relationship. It's not the peak experience. It's not the lightning flash of ecstasy that'll be gone, next time you get in a fight with your partner or whatever. You get it's like it's the relationship and the skill in building relationship and the feeding that soil of relationship. Like that's what we've lost in the West. That is what we're seeing the consequences of in our culture and in this devastating ecological unraveling that's happening. Yeah, and that was so clear to me. I was like, wow, if we actually lived this way all the time, like what we're seeing taking place could not take place. It would not be possible, actually. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Sorry. I just feel quite passionate.
Yeah, and so you should be, like you sounds like you had an experience that very few people in the West get to have of actually getting to feel what it's like to deeply and fully be living in relationship,
Yeah,
mutuality and reverence and connection with the plants and the land around you and what that brings you. And it sounds like it was a deeply nourishing, healing and like rightening experience. Like it righted you in yourself and in the world. And that's
yeah,
actually what so many people in the West are seeking for our own
yeah,
healing in our deep hearts and souls and all of our anxiety and stress and disconnect and confusion and existential angst that I think, and you are speaking as well, is coming from that place of ruptured relationship with the living world, with Gaia,
yeah.
with our mother, with the rest of our body. It's
Yes.
like we've cut our heads off, and our heads are sitting there being like, I wonder why I feel, out of, I feel so disconnected.
I feel like it's the deep wound in the psyche of Western culture that
Mm,
most of us don't even know is there. And we're running around exactly as you said, like headless chickens, or more like chicken heads without the body, trying to
yeah.
figure out what's really going on and trying, all these different approaches and medicines. And, oh, maybe I just need a better job or a better partner or, more money
Mm,
or whatever it is to try and meet what I feel is this deep relational rupture at the
yeah.
core.
Or maybe I need to go to an ayahuasca retreat and have ayahuasca 3 times and blow the hat off my head, and then that's going to suddenly fix all these problems. And I definitely see that in that community.
Massively.
There's
I Yeah,
so much
sorry.
to be learned there, and I definitely have been. It's one of the reasons that I've been working a lot with these kind of experiential plant courses, which is, in a way, I'm hearing you talk about dietas, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm reaching for without really
Mm,
knowing that's what I was reaching for.
yeah,
There's still this sense like, how do I invite people and myself into a space of really meeting medicine plants rather than just being like, here's the 20 plants for anxiety, being like, well, here's a plant that can sometimes help for anxiety. Let's really
yeah,
get to know it and work with it and journey with it. So
yeah,
hearing you talk about your experience is so inspiring. And I'd love for that to develop and grow, that people are having these peak experiences inside a much greater framework. And
yeah,
it's interesting as well, people are willing to pay for that peak experience, to
yeah,
prioritize it financially and time wise. And if you then go, oh, and actually there's this much deeper process, we're going to give you like lemon balm for a month, pay enough for us to make that happen. And people don't want to do that because it's not glamorous, it doesn't
hmm
feel, we've lost the art of subtle communication. And so
yeah, so much.
ayahuasca is great because she's so loud.
So loud. Yep.
She's like, oh, you lost your ears, never mind, I'm here. Sorry, everyone's ears. And so like you can be completely deaf to the subtle realms and still
hmm
hear her. And these other plants are much more subtle, and we have to
hmm
reclaim that ability to listen and to hear.
And the thing is, like ayahuasca works so like you can feel when you start working with them in this way that they're meant to go together. Like ayahuasca opens and synergistically connects with these other plants, and there's a richness to that experience of like it's so obvious to me. How do I say this? That that's one of the ways that ayahuasca is meant to be worked with. Less about any random person coming off the street having a peak experience, but rather like entering into this deeper relationship that involves these animist relationships with other plants, and like seeing the way that or they weave those connections together, and opens them up and facilitates the deepenings, and it's they're meant to be together, in my opinion.
And so I'm really curious, like, what you would encourage people who are already engaging with ayahuasca or are seeking to, how what you would encourage them to think about.
Yeah, I have a lot on that. I think something that became really clear to both my partner and I when we were in Peru was just this, I guess, this assumption that a lot of us from the West bring, that whatever you encounter in your ayahuasca experience is just the unfiltered truth, without recognizing that we bring all of our cultural stories and assumptions with us into the ceremony a lot of the time, and particularly on the other end, when we're trying to make sense of and integrate. Most of us are filtering that experience through our cultural lenses, our religious lenses, our early, like there's so many layers that it passes through. And so I think one of the things would be really important would be to just draw attention to, yeah, those assumptions that you're taking with you to the medicine, because even though you can have very powerful direct conditionalist experiences, you always come back into the mind afterwards, and there's a particular set of language and ways in which you are now going to interpret that experience, and it makes a difference. So I guess what has been really powerful for us is learning to see the water that we're swimming in modernity and Western culture, and the ways that that impacts the ayahuasca experience and the way we integrate it on the other side. And what we have become really passionate about is actually finding living earth cosmologies and languages and frameworks that I, as a settler colonial Western person, can take, that isn't stealing from another tradition. Like I studied with the Shipibo, but I'm not Shipibo. I will never be Shipibo. And so what I found is this kind of lens of deep ecology with systems theory and Gaian science, and deep time of Brian Thomas Swim and the deep ecology. All of those things move together, and they create, I guess, a living earth cosmology and language that is animist and relational, and all, so many of the things that I experienced in the jungle, but without, appropriating the shape and the words of someone else's tradition that isn't mine. Yeah.
Not only is that disrespectful and extractive, it also doesn't work as well. Like when
It
you're
doesn't work as well.
taking a cosmology that is steeped in cultural assumptions and understandings that you just don't have, it is always going to feel a little bit artificial and a little bit contrived. Even if you love it and it speaks to you, there's a contrived nature to it that, yeah, I think the guy in sciences, and for me it's a lot about, paganism has been a big part of that as well. Like I think
Hmm.
early adolescence and reading some Starhawk things and really meeting some of these
Yeah,
Celtic inspired neo-pagan mythology has been really powerful for me. That's felt like, oh yeah, this is something that I have the right to draw from.
totally. Yeah.
This
Yeah,
is my people in some way.
I'm a student of Josh Schrei from the Emerald podcast, and I think he, like something that I really resonate with him and his work is that I feel like he's done a really brilliant job of calling attention to all the ways in which those of us from the West are actually animist in our core, always have been, and bringing the kind of mythology of animacy forward again, and speaking to how animism is normative consciousness. It always has, always will be. It's ours too. Of
Mm.
course it is, like, but you don't have to go and take the particular shape of it from someone else. And because also those shapes are, they're bioregional. Like if I like that was another thing that was so powerful about being with the Shipibos, their relationship to that land, those plants, that particular river, that like the mythopoetic beings that kind of
Mm.
that they're interacting with and speaking to and singing to on a daily basis are of that land, and yet the shape of them will be found everywhere. Like for example, one that I always chuckle about a little bit is what they call in their tradition the sirena, the siren. Like this kind of seductive, erotic water being. Like we have the mermaids, and like
Mhm.
almost every, like the in the Tibetan code you have the nagas. Like there's these like, or the dakinis, the water dakinis. Like they're that shape is similar and will be found cross culturally. And another one would be the trickster beings. Like we have them in South Africa. They're found in Peru. That I know about them from Native American traditions. There's these beings that kind of, they're found on the land that you're on, wherever you are. Um, and so can we kind of come into relationship with the land that our feet are connected to, from the waters and the airs that we're drinking, and I think that's really important.
Mm. And when you're saying, they're having relationship with that land, you don't just mean the Amazon, you mean like that particular 50 acres where their village
Oh,
and extended lands are, and that
absolutely.
particular Noyarao tree and that
Hmm.
particular river. And that's something, I've moved so often in my life,
Yeah,
from, you know, cross nationally as well. And even in Australia, from Cairns all the way down to Melbourne, that's a big shift in land and climate and plants.
yeah,
And that's hard for us to develop when we are transient in that way. And I think
totally.
that deep ecology, you said that you've become a student of John Seed, who was interviewed in the podcast before, which is a really beautiful interview if people haven't heard it, to get a deeper dive into this deep ecology landscape and story. I think that
Yeah,
deep ecology, some of those practices are really good practical tools to start developing those relationships with the earth wherever it is that you find yourself.
absolutely. And that for me was, it was such a gift, because when I left the jungle and I moved here to Australia, my partner's Australian, and he underwent the 5 year, well, 4 year, because I was 1 year kind of experimenting and looking for a teacher, and then 4 years in full time apprenticeship. We did that together, and yeah, I feel really lucky that we had that experience. But yeah, when we came here, there was just such a sense of bereftness, because obviously leaving that incredible place and everything that we were doing there, and this, I guess, also a role that had such a deep sense of purpose connected to it, but also this incredible loss of vibrant animacy in terms of like the waters that we were swimming in culturally and in our day-to-day conversations, and interactions with other people were steeped in that awareness and permission to be in relationship with other than humans, and was constantly modeled to us by the people around us. And it was so normal, it was so normalized that it came out into our day to day, in which here it's actually really hard. Like, even though I had such a deep experience of that over here, like over there, coming here into this incredibly materialistic culture where if you were to do half of the, even a fraction of what we were doing over there, you'd be seen as incredibly weird. So I feel like I almost had to kind of put it underground. It now feels like a really tender part of me that I have a hard time speaking about. I feel very protective of it. And yeah, there was this bereftness in having to go underground in that way when we came here. Um, and it was in that place of deep grief, I guess, also from recognizing like in a new way the intensity of the wound of the Western psyche. You know, like after having, I guess, bathed in the healing waters for all those years, like coming here and experiencing the wound afresh, but in a very conscious way. It was devastating, and I feel like deep ecology gave off with John Seed. It like provided a space first to like name the grief, all these griefs, and normalize those griefs and express those griefs, because grief ritual is a big part of that work,
Yeah.
and has become a really big part of the work that my partner and I now offer. Like I feel like that's a whole other podcast really that we could speak to. It's like very, very essential part of our practice. But also in addition to that, he kind of named and gave language to all these things that were kind of more implicit in our experience in the jungle. I suddenly could talk about them, you know, using the language of deep ecology and the ecological self and the wider sense of self and animism. And, you know, I really had to work to like say it, because you can't, it's hard to like experience it fully unless you can say the thing. I don't know. I don't know if you've had that experience, but that's been my experience. Like I really have needed to grapple for the language to integrate such a massive shift. And he gave us that in such a powerful way, and we've followed that thread ever since. And I now feel like a pretty strong advocate of bringing deep ecology together with, I guess, the modern use of plant medicine. I feel like it's a context, because what's happened is like in carrying plant medicine over from the traditional context, animist contexts, bioregional context into modernity at large, we've decontextualized it a lot. We've focused on the loud, exciting, ecstatic, dramatic part of the process, and we've cut out the legs, basically the beauty, like all the other bits. And I feel like this is a way of wrapping those experiences in um, earth living earth context.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think what you're talking about there when we speak about decontextualization, people might say, well, what does it matter if we take something out of context, you know? And that I you know that is part of the challenge of the Western mind, is that we have been taught that it's the things that matter, not the context or the system that they exist in. And
Yeah.
even in quite cutting edge philosophy of, you know, sociology and psychology and organizational management, we're seeing systems thinking emerging
Yeah.
in some of the cutting edge Western thinking in the world. And it's a return to a much older ecological way of thinking, because
Yeah.
anyone can look at an ecology and see that it is essentially a system of relationships.
Yeah.
And systems thinking, whether you're looking at Shipibo, Animism, and Curanderismo traditions, whether you're looking at Celtic pagan earth based worshipping traditions, or you're looking at organizational systems thinking psychology, you know, which I've looked at all of them, so I feel like I can speak to that place. What we're seeing there is that it's the relationships that hold the true power, and it's the
Yes.
relationships that allow us and everything to make sense of what's happening, and also to be in balance, for things to be balanced and sustainable. You know,
Yeah.
when you take
Yeah.
things out of context, there's an unsustainability that comes through, because it's not that thing, whether it is a spiritual practice from another culture, whether it is a molecule from a medicinal plant, you're taking it out of the context of the rest of the chemicals and substances that are in that plant, whether it's
Yeah.
ayahuasca coming out of the context of the jungle, or whether it's taking a person out of context and moving them somewhere totally different,
Yeah.
where things get harder, they become less sustainable, there are unintended consequences, and it's harder to make sense of them. So that's when we're talking about context. It's so important for things, especially transformative peak psychedelic experiences, to be safely nestled inside a context that
Yeah.
holds that experience in a way that is safe and makes sense, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, thank you for saying it like that. That was
Mm.
beautiful. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yes,
Mm.
I'm hearing that there's this, you're really feeling the dangers, you're seeing the dangers and the risks and the great tragedy of losing the context of ayahuasca use in the experiences that you've had, and them coming out here out of context without that kind of safety net of relationships and meaning making net of relationships. And for you, that deep ecology has been that context that ayahuasca and many other of those kinds of experiences can sit inside of and still make
Yes.
sense to a Western mind. And I would argue that would do a better job than if we brought the whole Shipibo system over, and which we can't, because that system
You
is
can't.
land-based,
It's land-based,
And
exactly.
even for you living there, like, I imagine that it came a point where you were like, this is amazing, and it's not mine.
That's exactly the point I came to. And that was, yeah, a whole other, yeah, limb of my journey.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's something I'm still journeying, because I'm South African. I went and did an apprenticeship in Peru, then I moved to Australia, like I've felt that shock of being transplanted multiple times and having to really kind of figure out, all right, well, I'm here now, like what does it look like for me now? Like
Mm.
there was some moments where folks were asking, oh, are you guys going to run ceremonies and Shapiba, like, and it just felt wrong. It was like, I can't do that because I'm not that. And this land is asking me to just slow down and actually
Mm.
rediscover what all of those experiences like look like here. How do they ripen here, how do they grow here? And it was painful because obviously, a 4-year apprenticeship, there's a very particular materia medica that you're diving into, with our teachers. Like, we had to leave our friends behind, not just our human friends, but all of our plant friends that are not easily accessible here. And I wouldn't want, like, so much of the apprenticeship was gathering live plants in a very particular way that's part of the medicine. And I was like, it just doesn't work in this context. It needs to look different here. It needs to feel different here. It needs to be informed by the lands here and the story of this land and the story of my own ancestry. And so now I see it as a combination of place based, in the sense that I'm entering into a deeper relationship with this land, the spirits of this land, which are the plants. We've
Mm.
been dieting with the plants here for the last few years. Um, but also, the river and the actual other aspects of the land. It's not just the plants. It's like you're in a relationship with all of the
Mm.
land here, which includes the history of the land and the wounds of the land. Like, and
Mm.
you're also in Melbourne, so I don't know if you've experienced this, but when I came here, I really felt like the ghosts of this land, and it feels soaked in unexpressed grief. That was my
Mm.
experience when I arrived here, and I really had to like find a way into a relationship with the ghosts and I'm still doing that. Is that's a lifelong journey. So that's one aspect, is like very land or terrestrial based connection. And then the other piece that came in really strongly for me when I arrived here was actually reconnecting with my ancestry and finding what medicines and gifts and relationships are
Mm.
mine through the blood. And part of that was actually a really beautiful 6-month journey with a sangoma, a South African traditionally trained sangoma who lives here in Melbourne. And the Sangoma tradition is very ancestral, blood-based medicine and healing. Um, and it was actually really fantastic to kind of go from studying Kurandarism in the jungle to being like here in Australia, feeling a bit like, what do I do? And then having this piece of like South Africa coming in through a European ancestored, but traditionally Sangoma trained white man. It was just fascinating, you know.
And
So
speaking
I'm,
speaking of mixed contexts.
oh, I know. I was like, this is just totally wild, but it felt like a really important introduction, I guess, to blood-based relationship and
Mm.
ancestor-based
Which is
relationship.
part of that context as well. Each of our personal context is
Yeah,
also related to our ancestral context, and who those
absolutely.
people were, and what their traditions were, and what gifts and wounds they carry that show up for us in our lives.
Yeah, and I feel like
Yeah.
that really actually brought me kind of almost full circle back to some of the, I'm using quotations here, boring kitchen plants again, because I was like, wow, so many of these plants have been with my ancestors for for who knows how long, and kind of like starting to really explore the relationships with plants that my mum used on me growing up,
Yeah.
like, and that were outside of my bedroom window, that I was in deep relationship with, but not having this technology of relationship, like from this new perspective of now having this awareness and this technology of relationship. And, that's been really beautiful rediscovery of old friends in a new way as
Yeah, it's
well.
beautiful. I actually had someone come to me recently. They had a frozen shoulder and it was really acute and lots of pain. And they're like, "Oh, can you do anything? I can't get into the osteo." And so I gave them a mix of herbs, tincture to take. But I also went out to the garden and 2 plants that have some use for that kind of thing. They're not like the ones known for that, but they have an application. Was mugwort, which is definitely used for pain,
Yeah.
and also yarrow, which is used for
I love
bruising and blood moving. And they're the
Yeah.
2 plants I had in my garden that felt aligned enough, and I have deep relationships with both of those plants.
Yeah.
And so I went out. Was a French man, and not at all into this kind of thing. So I picked these herbs for him, and I told him instructions to go home and make a poultice on his shoulder. I did say, like, these plants have been found in Neanderthal graves in France. These plants have been journeying with your ancestors, and whether Neanderthals were our ancestors or not, they were also being used by the Cro-Magnons since before they were actually fully human.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how long your people have carried this medicine. And
That's
I saw
exactly.
him just be like, oh wow, something he'd never thought of before, and it felt really powerful to hand over those plants with that reminder. I was giving him some context for his existing relationship with those plants.
And I think that is just so, so true. And I really have felt, I remember the first few times doing diets with, the common kitchen plants, and saying to my partner, I feel like, even though this is the first time I've done this particular diet, which one of them was lavender, I feel like I've dieted this plant many times before already, because it felt so quickly established, in that kind of metaphor I was giving earlier about you planting it in the soil, and maybe the first diet is a sprouting and then the
Yeah.
next diet it felt very quickly grown, inside of me, that connection. And I was like, it's because I've kind of been micro dieting with these plants my whole life, and probably over
And
multiple generations.
I suspect you go far enough back through our ancestors, my ancestors, your ancestors, and there are people who did deep diet like work with these plants
Yeah, I know it to be true.
as herbalists. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so those are
Yeah.
also the ancestors have done some of that work for us,
Yeah. Yeah.
So coming back to
Exactly.
those plants that are your ancestral plants. And for me as a European, I was born in Europe, as a European person, those plants are my ancestral medicine. And there's to find those plants and the ones of the land that I live, I think that's
Hmm.
the magic interaction spot.
Yeah, totally. Oh, it's
Yeah.
so magical. Yeah.
Been so nice to talk to you, Skye. Thanks so much for
Oh,
being here.
yeah. Thank you. So much more we could say. This is, yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. Feels rare.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did the first time, and also re-listening to it today. And I'm really curious about your thoughts. Has anything moved, shifted, opened for you in listening to that conversation? What thoughts are alive for you? Please feel free to leave a comment, to reach out, to email me. I really think that animist, herbalist mythology is important for us, and I want this to be something we co-create as a profession of plant witches, herbalists, and plant folk of all kinds. So please reach out, and Happy New Year again.
Happy New Year!
That's us for this moon cycle. I'm so glad you walked into the dark forest with me. This podcast is part of The Elder Tree, a non-profit dedicated to empowering people through grassroots herbal education, weaving a strong community of herbalists, healers, and plant folk in Australia. You can head over to theeldertree.org to find out more. If you like this episode, we'd love you to subscribe. And if you know who we should interview next, drop us a line. See you next month. And in the meantime, may you be blessed with good health and many plants.